this make Biden acknowledge the Supreme Court is out of control? Maybe he'll come around on court reform the way he came around on student debt. Today, the Supreme Court will hear oral arguments in two cases about President Biden's student debt cancellation program. Biden would like the federal government to cancel $10,000 in student debt for anyone earning less than $125,000 a year, and $20,000 for Pell Grant recipients. The plaintiffs in these cases are arguing, somehow, that his attempt to do this causes harm to them, and so they are asking the High Court to shoot down the plan. Ostensibly, the case is about whether the tortured legal arguments they are making might hold water. But really, what happens today, and down the road, when they rule on the cases, will show us whether the court will seize yet another opportunity to assert itself as the primary policy-making body in American democracy. If it sides with the somewhat outlandish arguments being put forth by these plaintiffs, SCOTUS could stop this flagship Biden proposal, which has already had its legality vetted by the Department of Justice and the Office of Legal Counsel, in its tracks. This is an absurd potential outcome. Even in a term full of outlandish cases taken up by this court, the student loan deliberation stands out. As my colleague Mark Joseph Stern has written, the arguments in the two student loan cases are weak and weird. The federal government forgives student loans all the time. Multiple statutes give the Department of Education sweeping authority to cancel loans for a broad range of reasons, he noted in August. Even conservatives who doubt the program's legality think the plaintiff's reasoning is so flawed as to necessitate dismissal. The standing theories that have been thrown at the wall in these cases are wrong, and many of them would have dangerous implications, wrote Notre Dame law professor Samuel Bray and University of Chicago law professor William Bode in an amicus brief. If the court stymies loan forgiveness anyway, it will be yet another indication of just how unmoored the chamber has become. This isn't just about opposition to progressive ideas, but to the general idea of the rule of law and the principles on which it was founded. Paired with the string of recent equally egregious and unprecedented decisions, it shows how the court could insert itself as a profound obstacle to any sort of governance Joe Biden hopes to engage in for the rest of his presidency. Which is why it also presents an opportunity to Joe Biden. He has so far only been willing to venture mournful assessments of the court's rulings, deeply disappointed in the June 2022 ruling striking down a century-old law limiting concealed handguns in public. Roe's repeal was a sad day. To the surprise of no one, the court and the entire right-wing ecosystem of judicial activism has been undaunted by these remarks. But if the justices are willing to block one of his signature policies via such convoluted and bizarre arguments, it might be time to make the case to voters that the far-right activist court is out of control, and, finally, introduce court reform as a serious possibility. Already, public sentiment has soured on the court's legitimacy in the aftermath of the Dobbs ruling and the cascade of ethics issues that have become a mainstay in the news. According to Gallup, just 40% of Americans approve of the job the court is doing. Only 47% of the country trusts the judicial branch, an all-time worst mark. The argument will be clearer than ever that the main problem in American politics right now is an opportunistic, ideological Supreme Court, willing to disregard any and all established law and the balance of the co-equal branches to run the country based on their own conservative policy preferences. Debt cancellation advocates did everything right as to how you're supposed to effectuate change in a democratic system. They built a grassroots base, put pressure on candidates, won popular support, came up with a policy in a studied and deliberate way, said Brian Fallon, executive director of Demand Justice, a progressive legal advocacy organization. Conservatives district shopped, got friendly rulings at the lower court level, and now this issue is going to be decided by 5 or 6 unelected, hard-right judges. And that's playing out on issue after issue. Already, the Biden administration has been messaging aggressively against the court's overreach in anticipation of this outcome. Currently, the federal student aid website reads, "Student loan debt relief is blocked. Courts have issued orders blocking our student debt relief program." As a result, at this time, we are not accepting applications. We are seeking to overturn those orders. But if the court is willing to dash that debt cancellation, President Biden will have to do more than snipe from the pages of a Gov site. And he can't keep hiding behind the vague and weak recommendations of his lackluster panels and commissions on the subject, which laughably found that excessive change to the institution could cause democracy to regress in the future. The threat is not far off. He'll have to push for real reforms, including term limits and court expansion, resulting in more justices, shorter tenures, or both, also known as court packing. When Joe Biden ran for president in 2020, he didn't support court reform. A number of other aspirants, including Senator Elizabeth Warren, were champions of packing a Supreme Court that hadn't even arrived at its current 6-3 superconservative supermajority, and was yet to overturn Roe v. Wade. Warren remains one of the most vocal advocates of court reform, but she is not alone. Indeed, a number of Democrats in the Senate are on board, including Tina Smith of Minnesota and Ed Markey of Massachusetts. On the House side, Georgia Democrat Hank Johnson has been a quieter advocate for court expansion and term limits for Supreme Court justices. The issue has become increasingly popular in Democratic primaries, and many members of the new freshman class are already on the record supporting these sorts of policies. Biden may not love court reform himself. He is, at heart, an institutionalist who managed to devote large chunks of his State of the Union speech this year to the idea that bipartisanship is something Congress might bring back. But the court may force his hand. This June, it could hand down jarring rulings on everything from affirmative action to the existence of the entire Consumer Finance Protection Bureau. Those decisions will profoundly influence the lives of millions of Americans, often in exceptionally unpopular ways without any sort of democratic recourse. In the absence of court reform, this is the political reality that will continue unabated for years, and possibly decades, to come. With the broad popularity of debt cancellation, and the growing popular opposition to the court, there may be no better time to introduce an alternative. And remember, Biden hasn't been a leader on court reform, but he wasn't a leader on student debt cancellation until recently, either. It was the combination of grassroots organizing and fellow Democrats embracing the issue that eventually changed his mind. Now it's become a signature policy of his administration. Court reform could follow a similar arc. This court, one case at a time, is building that consensus for us, making converts out of more and more people, added Fallon. I think Biden will come to it reluctantly, as an option of last resort. Tuesday's arguments will provide us a new indication of the absurd lengths those 5 or 6 justices are willing to go in pursuit of their political agenda. Biden, who was actually elected to a political office to pursue political aims, will have to decide if he's willing to go out of his comfort zone before more rights are repealed, and a signature piece of his presidential agenda is foiled. It may seem unlikely, but he's defied expectations in the past. His administration's prioritization of judicial appointments, particularly his elevation of public defenders and legal aid attorneys to the federal bench, has marked a distinct break with the thinking of his old boss, President Obama. He's even shown a willingness to budge on the filibuster after venerating it for years. But court reform may prove more consequential and urgently needed than any of those things. After Tuesday, his presidential legacy may depend on it. That's today's latest news. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment so that this channel can continue to exist. Thank you for listening to the end, and I hope it's useful.